Thanks, Kevin. Look, my name is Tom Daly, and I'm going to be doing a presentation on COVID, technology, and the church. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for the opportunity to talk about this. And that's, of course, for I should add, for Reasonable Faith SA, if you haven't interacted or joined us before. Basically trying to give some structure for where we're going tonight. Going to look at the goals that I have for the talk, and just sort of some background to technology and background to me, trying to get some credibility here from where I'm for some of the comments that I'm going to make. And then we have to sort of look at technology, culture and church before and after COVID. And then comes the more or less concrete part, but the important part is what now? So the goals. I really had some specific goals with this talk. I want to raise awareness of how profoundly tech is affecting us all, our families, our churches, our relationships in general. And I want to try and provoke discussions and about how to actively participate in the digital world, and I want to make a challenge us that we need to do so well, and not participating is not really an option we get. If I'm successful with this talk, I hope particularly any of my friends or my people from my community that hear this, or anybody who knows me, I hope it comes over as challenging. But I really hope the gratitude I feel for all of my communities, including everything I've learned from Reasonable Faith SA, I hope that comes through really, really strongly, because I do intend to say some things that are challenging for all of us. And hopefully this is, if Kevin has me back later in the year, hopefully this is a prelude to some of my talk on transhumanism. So the background. Look, Reasonable Faith SA, we normally do apologetics, and we normally talking beyond the church community and beyond those of us that are followers of Jesus Christ. But tonight it's in-house. Still, if you live in the Western culture and you're at all influenced by tech, or living in a tech-saturated world, you might find something interesting. Firstly, let me try and get some street credibility. I've realised that I'm a digital native. It makes me a little different, and it gives me a little bit of a different perspective on a lot of things than most folks my age. Not all of us. I know there's other people in the audience this evening who are also digital natives. So it's not unique, but it's just less common in my age group. I had an internet connection back, I think, in about 86, 87, on an AT&T 3B2 computer. For those of you who have long memories, they were used a lot in the telephone industry. And in 1992, I joined Sun Microsystems, and I was actually then getting online it was the very, very early days of the World Wide Web. And I was doing outlandish things, like in Adelaide, telling companies in Adelaide that they would be having a website, and that any company that didn't have a website would be at a commercial disadvantage. And this was outlandish and hardly believable back in the early 90s. About 1996, when a technology called Java was in its very infancy, and it was taking the World Wide Web, which was also in its infancy, it was taken from being static, sort of broadcast, monologue, to being dynamic and dialogue. Myself and my family moved to California. And we had 3 kids under the age of 7. I think we were nuts. But we moved to Northern California, to the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area. And I'll try and show you on the map. Our offices were based out of Menlo Park, which is really East Palo Alto. And down here in San Jose is basically what they, that whole area around here is really Silicon Valley. And NASA Ames was just about there on the map. Stanford University is here. And in fact, that's what SUN stood for, Stanford University Networks. On the back of this sign, which is on this campus, which is where I used to work. In fact, the last time I was in this campus, it had just been sold to Facebook, and it was full of bulldozers actually ripping up all the lawns and things that you can see here. On the back of this sign is still the Sun Microsystems sign. So this is the Facebook sign that's now replaced, and Facebook, sorry if I wasn't clear, Facebook took over this campus from Sun, or actually Oracle, who bought Sun in 2010. And it's now Facebook. Why do I tell you this? Oh, and then to finish the story, in 2002, my family and I came back, and I've been telecommuting and real commuting for 20 years back to the Bay Area, be it Santa Clara or to Menlo Park, or actually to Redwood Shores, all in the San Francisco Bay. So look, I've been there for the earliest days of the World Wide Web, when it was text-based with a Lycos browser, and when it became Mosaic, and we had a graphic browser. My family and I were there for the dot-com boom and the bust, and we kept our jobs and our employment through that. I used to actually do sales calls, and I used to help with technology at eBay. And in fact, I worked with Eric Schmidt, who left the Java organization to go over and be CEO of Google for a long time. We were there for the September 11 attacks. Guys, that's all background, and hopefully I'm trying to just paint a picture, not of any particular skill level, but just of familiarity, and the fact that I've grown up with this stuff and helped actually contribute to it. That's going to be important for everything I have to say from now on. Look, I think we continue to underestimate the effects of tech and how profound it is, both the fantastic uses. Look at this, cancer breakthroughs are so close with CRISPR-Cas9, with genetic engineering. They're so close. What we're going to see in the next 10 years is unbelievable. But something that's around now, we can actually use carbon nanotubes to actually take away 25 to 30% of plaque from arteries. Now, I know a number of us in reasonable faith are in the 50s, 60s, and more, and they're in that. That's in the heart bypass territory, right? So just imagine, as this technology with carbon nanotubes starts to go mainstream, how fewer people will actually need those sorts of surgeries. And then, guys, look, as a Christ follower, I'm blown away by what our species can do. Look at we're flying helicopters around other worlds. And on the left is the Opportunity rover. It was Java powered. And I used to actually work with some of the JPL guys that actually did this. Like, we're exploring other worlds. What is man that we can actually go and do that, right? Technology is awesome, but it's also got a dark side. I don't know how many people would be familiar with the work of Tristan Harris. He's ex-Google. And on Netflix, there's a documentary called The Social Dilemma. It shows how we're being manipulated, where our attention is being gained and manipulated to make revenue for companies, to sell ads and to sell products. And we invented, and then over the last 20, 25 years, perfected tools like endless scroll, the like and the love button, which is changing our relationships. Young girls in particular, the dynamics are incredible. If they don't get likes or loves, they end up in an in-group or an out-group. And the algorithms are tending us towards more and more polarizing content, again, to keep our attention and to sell us stuff. And the tracking. You might have noticed that Apple this week actually released an update to iOS that's actually going to stop third-party trackers. This is key for our privacy, and it's going to be a very big battle for seeing if we can limit the manipulation that's happening to us. We're sort of aware. I'm just trying to tell you that it's much worse and much more pernicious than what we actually think. People here at Reasonable Faith, and anybody who knows me knows that I've been trying to raise the awareness of the awareness of the insidiousness of porn. It is so rampant. And look, even over the last couple of weeks, you know, the AFP staffer who's been locked up. In fact, if you go through the ABC website in the last month, there's been about 5 or 6 different incidents that the AFP, they've been locking people up. And Pornhub, you know, since I last spoke on it, they've deleted millions, about 80% of their stuff. Why? Because they didn't know which ones were rape videos and which ones were sex trafficking, which ones weren't. That's an admission. They're now being sued, and I'm glad of that. But here, last couple of weeks, at a primary school, there's 2 students showing each other their latest porn sites on their Apple Watches. Sure, the teachers take away their iPhones, but this stuff is changing and morphing so quickly that we need to keep up and we need to be aware, or we're actually not able to help. Now, I said about church, you know, before COVID, there's lots of valuable content on the internet, huge learning resources, and I'd say much of it has revolutionized my spiritual walk. But the local church, the majority of churches, they went online. It was sort of an afterthought. It was if a young guy was there, or was used for marketing. Hey, come to our 9 a.m. service. And it was certainly not that your church was wanting you to actively watch anything online. They wanted you there, probably still do, and good reason for that. We're going to explore. A great resource that I came about talking about cultural change is from Matt Gray on the Reasonable Faith Essay YouTube site, talking about the state of the church. And I went back and watched that, and honestly, you know, kudos to Matt. That was a brilliant talk. But and he talks about how the cultural change has taken place, and we didn't have to go anywhere. And the point here is that tech is accelerating cultural change, and we in the church really feel it. In fact, quite often, as Matt says, we're actually afraid, and fear often leads to anger and frustration. And it really is like, now we're like missionaries in a foreign land. The only thing that hasn't actually changed is the language, even though the customs and the morality and the discourse and even the logic has changed. And that's because technology, broadband communications, Wi-Fi, social media, smartphones, always on connections, they're changing us. And here's the thing I learned many, many years ago. There was a gentleman at a tech conference. He was talking at this conference, Oracle Corp, where I work today, and he was in LA, and he was actually early days of internet. He was at this conference. He was talking to us about our futures, but he was saying when he was on a TV show, I think it was Saturday Night Live or something like that, and he was telling people about the internet, and his kids found out what he'd been doing, and then he said, "Dad, you're telling people about the internet. What are you going to do next? Show them the refrigerator light going on?" And he said he realized that technology is only technology if it was invented after you were born. And here's the thing. The digital world and the digital revolution for most of us is actually invented after we're born. It is technology, but to our kids, it's not. And I say our kids, I'm talking about people under 40, so I shouldn't say kids, excuse me when I do that, younger people. And in general, most of us in our church leaders and those of us who are church attenders, just by demographics, aren't aware that we're in digital Babylon. Digital Babylon's a phrase coined by David Kinnaman in Faith for Exiles. It's an excellent book that I recommend to you. And he makes the point that there's a number of different groups: prodigals, nomad, habitual churchgoers, and resilient disciples. And they explore what's different about the resilient disciples. Why are some, in spite of so many young adults leaving church in the Western world, why are the disciples who stay, why are they staying? But look at the trend. As more and more young adults leave the church with no plan to return, 59, it's risen from 59 to 64%. Now, that's gotten worse since COVID. And we know that it's that it's some of the effects of tech. You know, digital Babylon, this is a quote from the book, strips a human potential by basically taking away our time. Those algorithms that I mentioned, the Wi-Fi, broadband, and honestly, it'd be really interesting to add up the amount of hours of porn wasted in young people's lives, of course, older people and our girls as well, increasingly. And here's the point. If you're spending so much time online, screens disciple. Screens and technology disciple. And this is not to scale, but some McGrindle numbers from McGrindle research in Australia sort of show that what we're up against in church communities compared to what Tim Keller says here on the right there, the constantly immersive moral ecology created through the digital revolution. What is it surprising that we're losing 64% and more of our young people when this is the balance of time and attention? Another view, this is from the US perspective in a different graphic, and this is some of the implications of this is that the phenomenal access is leading to profound alienation and a crisis of authority. And if you look at the picture there, the graphic, you'll see that the immersive hours of online aren't that different for churchgoers versus non-churchgoers in the 15 to 23-year-old category. And here's a really profound thought that I got hit with about 3 or 4 years ago that I've been wrestling with. Information access and information autonomy. Is there any wonder why we're actually having a crisis of authority? Because our young folks go to Google and Instagram and YouTube for their information. They're not going now to parents and teachers and pastors and ministers. And in fact, increasingly that's happening with us older generations. I mean, how many of us actually go to the doctor before consulting Dr. Google? So it's changing authority structures and the basis of authority. But here's the real thing. You can get so much information from Google and Instagram and YouTube, and that's true. You know, my young son has taught himself to weld. He's now the prime welder for a production, one of the production companies in Sydney, doing some of the TV shows that you watch. You're actually watching his stuff online. He learned from from YouTube. He taught himself. Think about, really, this is really profound. It's a profound change in the way we need to communicate. It's now a profound way in which we actually need to speak, particularly to young people, as particularly leaders or pastors. You know, you're being fact-checked. So if you're saying something about a political comment, let's say climate change, you're immediately being fact-checked. And worse, what you're saying may well not be what you're intending is more than likely in a young person's ears not turning up as what you intend, because it's being filtered by Google and Instagram and YouTube and more. And you know what? This is going beyond the West. I was shocked a little while ago to listen to this unbelievable podcast and I'll leave you to read the quote. But essentially, the atheist and secularism movement or infiltration is going into Uganda, and this pastor leader in Uganda is talking about it, lamenting it. And quite predictably, the pastors are essentially saying a version of, show me who your friends are and I'll show you who you're becoming. And they're overwhelmed. And they're saying, don't get on the internet. Don't go there. But that doesn't work. So what this pastor leader, Pastor Richard Wandera, was saying, that they're now starting to teach and use the resources for apologetics from the West. But the same thing is happening also in Uganda. I know from missionary friends, and I have some information of Ugandan situation. The prosperity gospel is getting there from the West as well, and of course, US politics is leaking out, and we'll say something more about that. Let me summarize this whole first section, and that is that I think we are continuing to underestimate how profoundly tech is affecting us both in our culture and certainly within the church. And by there, I mean all of us in the church. We are the church. If you're a church member, follower, if you're a Christ follower and go to church, that's us. That's who I'm talking to. And if we're not intentionally and actively and well participating or learning about the online world, we're doing so passively and unintentionally. So what's happened with tech culture in the church since COVID? Well, certainly that network world continues to leak out into the physical world. The political statements emanating from the US are now having a direct effect on vaccination rates in Papua New Guinea. I knew this prior to the SBS news story the other night, but around about 80% of the vaccines that Australia has sent to PNG for COVID are actually been so far given to expats, because the political statements emanating from the US are actually stopping the locals, are actually directly affecting the locals' attitude towards the vaccinations, and there is very, very few people coming forward or being willing to be vaccinated. Partisan pastors in the US are driving division in Australia. In Uganda, as I said, also, I hear now also in Ghana, so where else? And it's turbocharging conspiracies. Since we've been more locked up and more online, COVID has had the effect of turbocharging these things. And it's turbocharged this tech and the social media fueled rage. And I have to say, even in non-partisan pastors are having challenges keeping people worshipping together, realizing they have a prior commitment to unity rather than our politics. And I've had personal experiences, both sides of this. But think about this. Were you aware that in a good number of countries around the world, the internet access, your connectivity to the internet is provided by Facebook? Think back to those algorithms and the manipulation. What's happening there? Do we find it surprising, or at least I'm not finding it surprising, that these things are leaking out to the physical world globally? So what about the local church in the West? How did we respond to the pandemic? Well, our churches were closed. That was really confusing. That was like, if you want to look after your sick mother, or your sick mother-in-law, or your sick cousin, you stay away from them. What? We want to turn up when we're the church. It was very disorienting, and I feel so sorry for pastors and missionaries who could no longer get on planes or be with their people. But our local churches scrambled to broadcast their services and stress online giving. And they had expectations that the church body would and should watch the broadcast. They should consume it. And some churches focused on community and equipping leaders, and they moved their emphasis to smaller gatherings so they could have community and relationships. And beyond that, 2 hours a week, think back to that that mismatch between the online world and our church involvement. But look, pastors have got so much to worry about already. They've got to be managers, they've got to be health and safety experts, they've got to be child protection experts, they've got to be theologians. Now with the scientific, they've got to have some idea of science and current affairs. They're not tech savvy. And initially, many thought that people were watching the live stream and expected many more at church when they opened. Now, maybe some of that happened, but very quickly, and particularly in places where churches still aren't open, that didn't happen. Mark Sayers has a nice story about they had lots and lots of hits on their videos. But it turned out that somehow people looking for some tiger video were inflating their church service numbers by a factor of 10 or 20. But look, over time, the technological reality surfaced. Remember those algorithms? They're designed to inflate the numbers and inflate. Even now, this talk, they're designed to actually inflate how many people Kevin actually sees viewing this talk tonight, later when it's posted on YouTube. And why? 3-second views, people fast forwarding, people having it on in the background. Very, very hard to actually measure the interaction. And the analytics are skewed towards trying to make it look better to sell advertising. And look, obviously, as time went down and there were short shutdowns, there's less likelihood of change or introspection. And it was really back to the status quo. But really, most people weren't listening to that local broadcast. And Barnett figures show this. Again, I'm using, and I've been immersed in friends' churches in Colorado, in Utah, in California, as well as in Tasmania, in Queensland, because my wife and I were traveling last year. We weren't going to our church, although we joined a couple of times. We were largely going to Zoom churches in Alice Springs or otherwhere. But, one large mega church basically had 55,000 connected devices to their live stream at Easter and 5,400 by October. And the data from Barna just shows that most people aren't watching your broadcast. And in fact, they're checking out somebody else's. I was checking out Red Church, actually. I was really interested in what they were doing, particularly their lockdowns went longer. And I think we're just starting to hear leaders ask the really, really interesting questions, which occur to me straight away because of the fact that I come from that tech background. I mean, if you and I are watching the broadcast, what does it mean? I mean, does it mean if we're in the same room watching the broadcast, say if my wife and I are watching a broadcast from our church, are we worshipping? What about if we're not together and we're doing that? Are we worshipping? Are we doing it if we're doing that at different times because it's recorded, then are we worshipping together? What about if, as she was listening while getting dinner and I'm cleaning up the shed, are we worshipping together? In what sense? And what about if I'm listening to Tim Keller and you're listening to our local pastor? She's listening to our church and I'm listening to Tim Keller. Are we worshipping together? Don't get me wrong. Broadcast has its values. It's a starting point, and I'm so glad we're dipping our toe into the water. Maybe it has some benefit for lock-ins, but what about a phone call and community for those lock-ins? I saw somebody dropping around iPads so they could zoom into a Zoom church, and I thought that was great because it was including people. Is it shop front? Yeah, I think it got pointed out to me the other day that's going to be increasingly expected. But do window shoppers engage? Do they spend an hour and a half in the shop front before moving on? And by the way, if you're relying on it as your shop front, better be top quality. Look, the good news is that it's cheap and easy, but there are challenges. I mean, where's the discipling? Where's the accountability? There's no connection to people. We need to build all those structures in. And that's, look, I know we're starting. It's a starting point. And the cool thing was that the church leaders themselves, I got excited. They were asking the tough questions. Are we being too wedded to our buildings? What are our buildings for? Are they more for our community? Or are they for our platform? And why are we streaming? Is it about our platform, or is it about building community? Are we just too comfortable? And this is not me. I'm encouraged. I'm getting this stuff from Church Pulse Weekly and Kerry Newhoff, where they've got leaders on from right around the world, from Australia, from Canada, from the US, from the UK. It's global, and these are the questions that they're asking time after time. Craig Groeschel, whose church actually brought Church Online platform. They've been online for decades, and he said, look, when our church is closed, I had to actually think about where my identity was formed. Was it in my podium and the platform I've got? And that's challenging. But for us in the pews, Mark Sayers was saying, hey, what's the quality of disciples like? If we're not actually somehow finding community and continuing ministry. And he raises the question, what happens when the baby boomers die and retire? Where does the money come to support all those buildings and those programs? That's a whole different topic. But I'm so rapt to see church leaders getting involved in those questions and starting to ask the uncomfortable things. And I saw some great innovative stuff. A car park church, my friends in Colorado, until it started to snow, they had church in their cars in an old drive-in. I got invited by one of my friends and pastors to join daily devotions on Zoom, and I can't tell you how wonderful that was. And now it's weekly, and it's something I actually look forward to each week. And it's revolutionized much of my spiritual life. I want to try and see if I can grow that into the future. There's lots of stuff. There's something happening with online alpha huddles in Red Church in Melbourne. And sorry if I'm sort of rushing. I am trying to deliver a whole lot of really good stuff and challenge people, and I'm trying not to go too long and be completely hypocritical by doing so. But there's also other challenging good stuff. You know, Rick Warren is a church leader that a lot of church leaders listen to, and he said, look, our church was supposedly closed, and we baptized 16,000 people. Why? Because we had more than just a podium and just worship. They got ministry. They had a mission going where they got everybody in the church to call they got a group to make sure that everybody in the church got phone calls, or they got on a small group, and they baptized 16,000 people while the church was supposedly closed. At least the church building was closed. And you know, it made me realize, and my time at Reasonable Faith here in SA made me realize, for the first 300 years, there were no church buildings. There was no Bible. And yet the church grew amazingly. Relationship. And I guess the challenge now for Rick Warren is to make sure that the screen world don't prevent all those people being discipled away. So in summary, COVID 12 months in, globalism is going to be a change. Globalism, the way we were doing it, is dead. And I don't have any comments here. It's a whole talk on its own. But it appears to have accelerated the cultural trends of secularization. It appears to have increased hostility and separation towards the church and separation within the church. And our online hours have increased. Our work and our information, we're expecting to get more and more information online. We're not looking to institutions. Even less are we looking to institutions or institutional authority for information now. Devices continue to proliferate. I talked about the smartwatches, but more than that, can you go out and not have a screen now? It'd be really lovely to eat a dinner and not have a screen somewhere in front of you. And you know what? Pastors and their congregations are just often exhausted now, particularly where closures have been longer or people haven't come back. And Tim Keller says there's no hugs. There's no hugs anymore. And honestly, pastors, missionaries, you've honestly got my sympathies. This is really hard at the moment. I see just how divided people are. And but the good thing, the church is dipping their toes into the online world is fantastic. Asking those good questions. You know, here's a great example, and I got so excited about this. There is a term, Christian nationalism now. Now, I said to you, we worshipped in the US, and through September 11, Christian nationalism was such a big deal during September 11, but didn't have a name, and nobody was talking about it. They are now. And we have a chance to reform and repent. It's wonderful. It's ugly, but it's wonderful at the same time. And honestly, opportunities for speaking meaning and purpose and creating community really abound. And that's what we're going to look at now. So what? All of that COVID stuff, all of the tech stuff, so what? Well, in the words of Tim Keller, I don't think we should just go back to the way it was. My sentiments exactly. For Christ followers, what we need to do is to learn to live and flourish in digital Babylon. But hey, we got plenty of resources. Jeremiah 29. I love this, but seek the welfare of the city where I've sent you into exile, into digital Babylon. I love that term from Faith of Exiles. Or the way I've been thinking about it for quite some time is Matthew 10:16. Be wise as serpents and innocent as doves, as we live as a minority in a culture that is moving rapidly away from a Christian ethic or even acceptability. The rest of this is a work in progress. It's my observations over 12 months, well, actually much longer than that, but certainly over the last 12 months since churches closed and started dipping their toes into the digital world, the local churches, the majority of churches, almost all churches in the West. And sort of here's my summary up the front. I think we, the church, not we the people, but we, the church, need to move into digital ministry. We need to move past broadcasting and just turning people into consumers. We need to address that imbalance of immersion by getting past Sunday, past platform and building. I was speaking to some older friends at lunch a couple of weeks ago. They're so excited by what they're learning online now. They're 10 years older than me or more. They're so excited with what they're learning. And they're pastors. They used to run their own church. And yet they also said to me when they came to faith, they were in Bible study four nights a week. That was immersive, but immersive for Christ. Anyway, we've got to dial down the monologue and we've got to dial up the dialogue. I'll expand on this. Our alternative in not doing these things is the status quo or a return to 2019. If we do that, we leave unaddressed that imbalance. And why would we do that? Aren't we called to go? If in this case, it's to go into digital realms, it's still going. But there are some table stakes. And I'm talking about me here. This is note to self. We need to, if we're going to be online and we're going to have online dialogues, we need to get unoffendable. And we need to be wise as serpents and gentle as doves. This is a serious task we can all undertake, right? I've read the book On the Right Unoffendable by Brant Hansen 3 times. I recommend it. I've bought it for people. Let me know. I'll buy you a copy. I practice getting into conversations that would frustrate me and yet trying to be peaceful and trying to bring grace and peace. And what if we were known online for being agents of peace, not agents of division? And I try to model myself after some of the gracious and peaceable apologists. John Lennox, if anybody knows him, and John Dixon in the Australian context. Man, I just really recommend those folks. And for a younger guy, Sean McDowell out of Biola, the Bible Institute of Los Angeles. And I constantly pray before I hit the send button on anything. I've gotten in the habit of, hey, Lord, help me to see those I disagree with and even oppose, and even if I'm offended by as image bearers. And quite often that's followed by the delete key. Not always, in fact, less often these days. And look, Rebecca McLaughlin, apologist out of young lady, English lady out of lives in Boston in New England. She talks about all truth or all grace. Don't make either mistake of being compatible with culture or graceless. But we need to be both. Her writings are great for that. And if we're afraid and we're angry online, go and count up the number of fear nots or take courages in the scriptures. If that doesn't help, go back and look at Matt's great video from from December 2019 again. Let me move on. Sorry, let me finish that story. First, for us in the church, if we're Christ followers, let's put the gospel first and politics second. Now, I used to be really bad here, and I think I'm so much better because of the resources on the previous page. But here's what we do. I still see this with some of the kindest, most gentle people I know. But online, we don't act the same quite often. It's more impersonal. And yeah, there's a real people behind those screens and keyboards. And we forget that. It's so easy to forget that. We do step one, do something to support your view. Let's say climate change. Hit send and think to yourself, take that. Now you've got to agree with me. But you never considered how much harder you've actually made the gospel, particularly for some young person to actually hear. Look, I can't get into this now, but at a state conference, a global national conference for CRC churches last year, a friend of mine, one of the pastors, gave a great presentation on this, and I've referenced it there for you. You'll be able to get it when I post the slides on SlideShare, or I can share it in the chat later on. Church online, back to broadcasting. The internet is designed to take away the idea of locality, right? That's why the pastor in Uganda is being affected by stuff in the US. That's by design. YouTube's getting 700, this is back from 2018, they're getting 700,000 of video loaded each day. What in the heck would make you think your local church video or this video here that I'm recording is going to get found or used? Look, and then you're competing with everybody else for their time and their eyeballs. But here's Carey Nieuwhof in the quote that I've got there. Nobody should be able to outlocal the local church. This hit me like a ton of bricks. Of course. I'm listening to these and young people at our church are sending these gifted, talented, wonderful preachers, and I'm learning so much. But they don't know my name. They don't know my family's name. They don't rejoice or weep with me or my family. They've never sent a fellow diabetic from the congregation to support or encourage and comfort when your son is just diagnosed with diabetes. Yet my pastor has and does, and so much more, as have my church community. This is huge. Pastors, think locally. If we're speaking, think locally. Yes, think locally for relationship. And dialogue more, monologue a lot less. Sting and the police, poets, priests, and politicians have words that pray for your, beg for your submission. So do Google and Facebook. They want to track you and sell you something. And right now, I'm trying to sell you some ideas. I'm trying to sell you some ideas of getting involved in the internet for the benefit of those coming along behind of us in particular. But relationship, including listening, is about giving something. It's about giving time and attention and worth to the person you're listening to and you're having relationship with, because relationship requires time and attention and worth. Monologues easily ignored, clicked away, dismissed, and more in the world, that's what happens. Dialogue is much more likely to engage, and there's some examples. And here's some tech tips. And I'm going to apply these to myself. For documents in the online world, there's a moniker that gets attached. It's and excuse me, guys, this is not great on the video, but TLDR, it stands for too long didn't read. Well, there really should be an equivalent, too long didn't view. We've simply got to cut down on length if we go online, if you want to have a hearing. You might be called to preach for an hour and a half. You might be called to have an hour and a half worship service or a 50-minute video, but it's inversely proportional to the amount of people that listen to it. We've got to cut it down. So idea one, let's humble ourselves. And that includes our pastors and our preachers, but including me, by watching our own videos after posting. And, this really became clear to me the other night. Kevin and I had a run through, and he made me watch the initial run through. It was not pleasant. I'm hopefully not subjecting you to what I would have been subjecting you without that run through, and many since starting this evening. And idea two, and I'm going to commit to this, and if Kevin will post it, make and post a 5-minute summary of your message and video, and post that as well as your message. I guarantee you this will revolutionize your viewing, your listening experience, because people will engage much, much more. You've lowered the bar, you've lowered the impediment to you being heard. Look, some really notable, as preparing this presentation, some notable examples of dialogue more and monologue less came to my mind. There's a leadership group that my eldest son was involved in at church, and kudos to our pastors who ran that. It made me realise just how influential that's been in his life. And that was done over a couple of years, and it was done in-house, and relationship was a small group. Dialogue, relationship. And our church has started Q&A sessions. One of the issues that our kids and our younger folks are so biblically literate that you've got to sometimes raise the questions that they need to be asking, because those questions haven't even formed. They're just taking them as presuppositions. So for relationship, we can really exploit video conferencing. It enables teaching, and that's vertical, but it gives you a presence. You are present. When I'm doing worship via Zoom on a Friday morning, I'm present. I have a relationship. I have dialogue with the other guys that I'm worshiping with. You can do community with video conferencing. It takes more work. It needs intentionality. But particularly in the teaching environment, it really aids accessibility. You can actually have people turn up more often to your class. My wife has a couple of chronic diseases. She can go to something online where going out after work is a real problem. But she can be part of something. The accessibility and the reliability of turning up to events is actually enhanced with video conferencing. Look, it lowers barriers. I can think of people that I can invite to an online alpha done via Zoom that I couldn't invite to church, or if I invite them to church, I'd worry about not being able to keep them at church. Come once and never come again. But I think that I can involve conversations like a halfway house. And this is very in line with actually what our pastor, he often says, it's either go and tell or come and see. This is come and see, but come and see in a safe way. And it's hard to shut down. We saw that Donald Trump, rightly or wrongly, I'm not talking politically right at the moment, but we saw how quickly he was shut down with his broadcast platforms. And he still hasn't recovered that platform. Video conferencing is really, really hard to shut down. That's why it's happening in the developing world. Look, I'm still mulling over local in the context of video conferencing, because I have some deep relationships in the US that I hold via video conferencing. Look, there are some cons. We're not fully embodied. And honestly, you can use a video conference tool and let's just do monologue. Don't be tempted back into that. And for my missionary friends, they point out you can't eat with somebody, and eating with somebody, we know this from Acts, from our scriptures. Eating with somebody is really important. You can't do that via Zoom. Look, Tim Keller's got a great resource, and he says this much better than me. So now we're just going to have a wander through some of the things that are happening and some of the ideas that I've been discovering for how to get beyond broadcast, how to move into digital, how to what the goal of moving into the digital world is for our churches and us as church members and participants. This guy, Dave Adamson, who we'll meet in just a minute, has got a nice graphic here. The goal of online is engagement, leading to discipleship via relationship. Look, this is work in progress, and you'll note my work in progress sign on man on the right-hand side. It's early days, but this is really, really interesting. This is purposeful. Dave Adamson's actually a social media pastor. He has see his blog for online pastor job descriptions, and this is a growing part of the church in the US, particularly as they've been shut down. Dave Adamson's actually his background is really interesting. You can listen to him on Church Pulse weekly podcast, but he lives in the Sunshine Coast, and he worked for Andy Stanley in North Point Church who has had a global ministry for a long time, and is a pastor I listen to, and a lot of young folks I know listen to regularly. And he's got some great ideas about how to hack that those algorithms from Facebook and the social media companies. And who knew? Facebook, that extremely humanist secular organization, has a missionary department. Nona Jones runs a church with a local church with a husband, and I don't know her, but I've been listening to her a little bit. And she sounds like a pretty conservative Christian that I would recognize. And she poses and on Facebook, and I'm like, yeah, really, on Facebook? And she talks about online ministry. And sorry again, excuse me. She sort of challenges church leaders, and she meets with a lot of church leaders, she claims, around the US, hundreds each year. If you could not have a church building, how would you do church? Well, churches are still closed over there. That's a pretty relevant question. Don't simply replicate the weekend service, and group in innovative ways. Look, I'll let you go through the rest of this, but I would note demographics are important here. There are a lot more than 3 billion people in the world are actually on the Facebook platform, but honestly, all the younger folks are on Instagram. They're not on Facebook, or at least not active. And here's something that I just started interacting with this guy, Dave Ferguson. And man, I like some of the stuff that he's saying. Look, this is still under construction. In fact, he says, of course I don't know. I mean, we're making this up. And what he means is by digital church strategies. But this is really intriguing to me as somebody who works on cloud and on the cloud models these days, like Oracle Cloud Infrastructure or Amazon Web Services or Google Cloud, all of those cloud type services. That's sort of what I do these days, right? Well, for Oracle, but I'm familiar with the others. And he wants to be, he says, think viral, like Airbnb or Uber. That's intriguing. And he's getting ready to launch what they call 3C communities, which are micro churches. He's not giving away their big church and main church, but they've got 30 or 40 more communities and churches in the pipeline. And he's looking to the east, to India, China, and Uganda, where and I'm just parroting stuff here now. I haven't checked this out, but I will. Where he sees churches that are rapidly multiplied. And China has long been in my mind because, of course, they can't broadcast their services, and their church, we believe, is expanding, as we believe it is in Tehran. But he referenced a church planting org in India, which he's working with, learning from, with over 100K plants. under construction again, but really, really intriguing. Look, I need to make a special mention of Alpha Online. And I would suggest if anybody wants to dip their toe in the water of online, consider running Alpha Online. Now, the funny part was back in about November, Jill and I were going to sign up to do Alpha Online and then host Alpha Online and run them. But when we went to find an Alpha Online, the website was broken and they said, sorry, got all through the registration. It said, sorry, there's none running in your area. Eventually got back in touch with people and they said, yeah, sorry, our website's broken. And in between, our church run on-premise, in-home Alpha Online. And so we went to that. My intention is to get back and invite people to Alpha Online during this year. And back to Faith for Exiles and those habits and the differences for those disciples that actually stand up to culture and don't get discipled away by that immersive digital experience and the culture that we're living in. And they have 5 common practices that they outline. Number 3 is that when isolation and mistrust are the norms, forge meaningful intergenerational relationships. I got to say, that's something we could all do. Look for the generations coming behind us, particularly, the demographic here at Reasonable Faith, they're saying normally there's so much Bible knowledge and history knowledge and knowledge to share. If we can start being online and forging intergenerational relationships, we could really, really help those coming behind us. I've been shocked to find out how much we have to offer as we get older. And whoops, I'm sorry. And number 5 was curb entitlement of self-centered tendencies by engaging in countercultural mission. I can tell you one of the activities that my family has been involved in our church does is each year for 15 years, my wife would go and cook for a group of young people that would go and be on mission to our church in Alice Springs. I did it years ago. I counted back from all the pictures and all the kids that I knew, and I counted up roughly 50% of those kids that went on that mission trip are still worshipping and engaged with Christ today. And this seems to add weight to what they're saying, this number 5 practice. And by the way, get Faith for Exiles and read it, because they have all the data to back this up. This is not hearsay, but this is research. And they also point out that one of the I need to finish that point. 50% is pretty darn huge compared to the normal dropout rate of kids in that age group and young people in that age group, 15 to 23, let's say. And one of the strongest predictors of being a resilient exile is that their church communities help them deal with technology, that we give them context, and we use the gospel to actually help contextualize culture and the digital culture that they're living in, digital Babylon. We need to explain that to them, meet them where they are and explain that with culture, with the gospel. Here's something we can all do. Let's get tech wise. Let's stop being controlled by tech and let's start taking control back, whether it's porn or whether it's the family sitting there together, supposedly watching a movie, but each being on their own mobile device, maybe with headphones on. In what sense are you together? Maybe it's getting rid of phones for the weekend and getting off the internet. That's certainly one of the big things about those missionary trips, getting people away out into God's creation and away from man's creation and man's devices. Look, my modest online activities, for years I've been running 2 lists on Facebook, one for my friends of faith, where I can post things that just assume fellowship of Jesus Christ, that would otherwise just enrage or frustrate many of my atheist and militant atheist friends. and that they wouldn't understand. It wouldn't promote relationship. And often I'll start an argument online, and this is actually a good thing. I recommend this. Actually, Reasons to Believe, the apologetics organisation, has a new initiative called Agree to Argue. I love that. I'll start an argument online and then organise to catch up with coffee or beer or a meal with people and continue it. It's a great way to go. And do it via video. I can do that via video call as well. Last one was from an Indian friend who's in Portugal, of all places. Porn, you've heard me. I'm trying to raise awareness of that within our families, within our churches. Again, my plea to pastors and church leaders: you're being filtered. It's easier for a young man, but in particular, but increasingly young girls as well, to give up their faith than to give up their porn habit. We need to engage with that, and we need to engage in small groups, not from the podium. I'm regularly challenging anti-church stuff from my friends. They'll post stuff that's just like inane, and I'll say, well, where did you get that from? Do you believe that? And honestly, sometimes right there is a win for the gospel. Kathy Keller, and I'm not equating myself in any way to the Kellers, but Kathy Keller said when Tim Keller first started preaching in New York to a hostile audience, anytime he got up on the podium and he wasn't dumb and he wasn't angry, it was a win for the gospel. So in my small way, in my very small sphere of influence, I'm trying to do and channel that same idea. Also with science and tech, there's an assumption that science and tech are at odds. I'm trying to show that they're clearly not. And I've actually quite often had my atheist friends in fairly untenable and dumb positions, arguing from dumb positions about science and tech. And my wife uses hospitality. We had been last year doing for about 18 months doing dinner at the Dailies, where we just have an open house. The relationships that we've forged have just been such a blessing to us. And I'm learning about Instagram and TikTok. Look, we can talk about this more in the, because I know I'm over time, about how we might apply these things to reasonable faith essay. But here's my call to action. Realise that our kids and our grandkids are growing up in digital Babylon, and we actually inhabit that world with them. But their online world is catechizing them away if we don't. Let's get online and start learning on how to create learning groups and communities, and look for mentoring opportunities. Create them. And when online, let's put our politics second and the gospel first. Let's listen more. And that's a note to me as much as anybody. I'm a work in progress here. I'm trying. Church leaders, start thinking interestingly and investing beyond building podium and monologue. You know, Nona Jones might work for Facebook, but it's a great question. You know, the first 300 years of the church, there were no buildings, and it grew like crazy. And if somebody really is planning 100,000 churches in India, let's find out how. There's much more to say, much more to discuss, but we need conversation. So please, I hope you've been using the chat or use the comments section once we post this to YouTube. And thank you very much. There's some resources. And I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Tom. I'm just going to go into, would you like to, stop your sharing?
I'm looking for the button right now. There we go.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your talk. And so what from our dry run, I think you've shortened it quite considerably.
Yeah.
Okay. Just going through some of the chat comments. Initially from Brian, I heard that Sun was planning to sue Indonesia over the use of the name Java. I'm sorry. Would you like to?
I would have expected something from Brian.
John, are you going to support that by any means? Sorry, Brian. You better turn on your microphone.
I'm sure it was meant to be a joke at the time, but I did actually hear that.
Yeah,
Right,
I'm
okay.
sure it was a joke.
All right. Brian, to everyone, our parents, would you like to talk to that?
Something that I heard a few years ago, and it's kind of resonated with me a bit, that we are a special generation, the likes of you and me in particular, I suppose, Tom, that our parents don't really understand the digital side of things properly. They grew up in an age where the light in the refrigerator was something special. But we've grown up with the light in the refrigerator that's been normal to us. And it's during our lifetime that computers have come in and taken over. So we have experienced both life without and life with, and we are comfortable in both sides. Whereas our children, on the other hand, they don't know what it's like, and they would be totally lost without computers and everything. So we can see both sides of that, and we are exposed cross-cultural in that sense.
That was my point about digital native. I was drawing very heavily on the Faith for Exiles and the excellent work by the Barner and David Kinnaman. And I was so excited. A number of pastors at our church have been reading that book, and honestly, it's actually changing. It's changing. They started doing Q&As. It's exciting, actually. It's exciting to see the dialogue that's happening, because they're starting to see and engage much more with the culture around us.
The next comment is from me. Should we go back to live meetings, or go for a mixture between live and Zoom, or stay on Zoom? So what do you think?
I think you need to do both, if you're asking me. I don't know that we need to go back in for the meeting each month. But what if you, each week? But what if you had a monthly, meeting at the pub over maybe the previous week's Zoom or something like that, or somehow if you would augment with in person. And honestly, that's what I've been doing 20 years, and how relationships are forged. And I'm hoping how my missionary friends will get back to it. They'll be on a plane a lot less, but they'll still take time to get on a plane every now and then to go and eat with people.
So what do some of you others think about format?
It's easier to be here without traveling, depending how far away you are. When I was working on Green Hill Road, it was easy to ride over. Now I'm in Davern Park, and I wouldn't be driving all the way over there very often. But the same as with online church, it means that you can come and go, and anyone who saw me would see me going back and forth and eating and thinking, oh, that's interesting. I wish I hadn't missed that last couple of minutes.
On the other hand, I've noticed that Phil Daly, who used to come regularly when it was live, all the way from Gore or Middleton or somewhere like that, now has not been coming since it's been online.
Victor Harbour.
Yeah, I think he actually dropped out prior to the COVID, and I couldn't get any response from him. So it may be a little bit more serious than that. He's an old guy.
But yeah, online obviously doesn't suit everyone.
Yeah, I know. I got some people who said they're interested in what we do, but not in Zoom. But then again, there's some people actually prefer it and they wouldn't be able to participate if it wasn't on Zoom. So yeah, so I was kind of pondering going back to a mixture of both. So actually have live meetings and also make them available on Zoom. But I'm not sure how the technology would work at this stage.
I think we did that either just before or just when COVID was starting. We had at least one meeting where, actually no, we've had a few times where the speaker has been remote, but it's been possible for other people to watch it at the same time. So yeah.
I can't remember doing that. I thought we'd gone black and white.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't remember that. But then I was traveling last year, so maybe you did it just at the start of COVID, did you? Or
The last one before COVID, perhaps, or maybe it was one earlier where we were having the speaker. The speaker was not in Adelaide.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we've had
Hugh
Ross.
Hugh Ross, yeah.
Yeah, Hugh Ross presented, and we had a live audience.
Mm.
Yes, but yeah, there's kind of I have to get off my backside and actually make inquiries with Tabor and see if they'd welcome us back. But probably there's a few technical issues I'm not sure how will work out in terms of which way the camera's facing and all this sort of thing. But yeah, I think if we could go for a mixture of Zoom and live, then that could make the best of both worlds.
Hi, all. My name's Norm. I'm actually in Hobart, so
All right.
Tom invited me today, but I know South Australia reasonably well. Lived there for quite a while. Look, we do a number of meetings where we do both with the Zoom and live. I'm a pastor of a church over here, but one of the events that runs from, we have a cafe. We have a group of guys that come in and meet on a Monday night, and they have like, there's a big screen and the microphone on top, and they have a speaker on the table. And they've actually been able to expand what they do to have a group that even meets in Launceston in a different location with 4 or 5 people.
Yeah.
And there's some people that just for one reason or another actually want to be at the meeting. They can't get there that night, but they can just log in on Zoom and still be part of it. So it gives a lot of versatility. And by having one reasonably large screen with a camera and then a microphone on the table, which is quite easy to do these days, you can get quite a good participation. And so it actually gives you a lot of flexibility.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, mixed online and in-person groups have become a bit more common. Yeah, I've been to a few things where some people have got together, but then we have a screen there and with all the other people who are doing it from home.
Sorry, come.
No, I was just going to say, well, perhaps I should get off my backside and have a good talk with Tabor and also with Thomas.
Hey, Tom, thanks for a really interesting talk. I love your bit about the questions, having the church changing the format to include questions after. I think that's definitely a way to go, especially for the younger kids or for the, anyone under 25, basically. Having 2 adult kids at home who are going to uni lectures or doing them online, I know what they would prefer, and that is to have a group where they're actually engaged in talking about the topic and get a chance to contribute. So I think church is going to move away from just the preacher sitting up there and blasting, or for a time. I don't,
I think it has to.
Yeah.
It's going to become less and less, preaching to less and less people. That's what the Barna data shows, and that's what we're seeing in our experience.
Yeah, go on. Sorry, go on.
Oh, and of course there are places where this is happening, and they're actually really green shoots, and there is life. And again, you can go back to Matt's presentation from last year.
Yeah. Even in the teaching field, we find that you can't. Kids' concentration span goes to about 10 minutes, and then you've got to be doing group work or activities, or and that's a generation that's coming up. So we've got to address that, really. But just another thing, when just talking about all this stuff from a Christian point of view, it is actually quite scary, right? The whole lot, all right? But I'm reminded of the scripture that says all things work together for good for those that love the Lord. And that doesn't say all things except the internet, all things except technology. That includes all things. So we've got to go in with not be frightened or scared away from it all, or get anxious because I know people can get a bit anxious about the whole thing, but just know that God's going to use the internet to reach the lost. And if you look at it this way, the Bible has said to us that, well, Scripture tells us that the gospel will be preached to all men, and then the end will come. And what's a great way of getting the gospel preached? Through the internet. So I've always thought that this is going to be an avenue that God's going to use. It's not belonging to anybody else. It actually belongs to him. So, yeah, anyway, that's my take on it. I think that the internet's here, but it's not here by chance. It's here because it's an opportune time that God wants to preach the gospel, and we as a church have to realise that and take it on board.
Yeah, indeed. The scary thing for a lot of church leaders, that keeps coming up time and time in the conversations I'm listening to between them, is the issue of control. Because the more you actually have dialogue, the less you're actually in control, and that's scary. And for church leaders who are seeing people be led off to different heresies or fall in different ways, you know, I have a ton of sympathy for, because that's got to be really hard and really scary. But on the other hand, the alternative is now is to be having a megaphone with nobody at the other end of it. That's what broadcasting can be if nobody's actually looking at it. And the really bad thing is, actually, Kerry Newhoff, I'll quote Kerry Newhoff, because he's a church leader. New Life Church in Canada is a mega church, and he's now stepped down. So he has lots of he regularly talks about buildings and church leaders and church leadership, but he talks about it from the position of being one, right? So I'm going to quote or paraphrase Kerry, and he basically says that we need to give up control, and we need to see what's happening. And we actually need to embrace that fear. And he was one of the first ones online to start looking at the live stream and going, hang on. This sounds a lot better than what it maybe is. And he recognized, and talks as a pastor, that it's really hard to look at the figures, look at the data, and see it declining, and see your influence potentially waning. And it's really, really hard to take that bad news. His attitude is, though, there's no such thing as good news or bad news as a church leader. And I'm quoting him now, there's only news. So if things aren't working, you get a chance to change them around. End of quoting Kerry Newhoff for the moment.
All right, just on Brian made a quote or a comment. We can't go back to the way it was, which makes it very important not to try, but we must simply throw out the old, or mustn't simply throw out the old because it is old. Rather, we must seek out what the new should be, which will always include both old and new. So, Brian, would you like to comment on that?
We can't go back to the old because the world has changed. There's no denying that fact. And so often we see in lots of different contexts, people questioning when are we going to get back to normal, whether that be from a business perspective, from a general life perspective, or from a church perspective. Everyone is asking the same question. And the answer is we can't go back to the old normal. It's going to be a new normal. And we have to find what that new normal is. And that new normal doesn't mean throwing out everything that was, because there's plenty of good that was. But we can't just hang on to the old as well and pretend that nothing has happened, because plenty has happened. We have to find the way to go ahead, the way forward.
Totally agreed. And I had a slide on exactly that, but I had to hide it because I didn't have enough time. I had a slide on the things that I wasn't saying. I wasn't saying that we need to change an iota or a dot of the gospel. I wasn't saying that. In fact, oh no, when I minimised my presentation, I lost it. But yes, indeed, I totally agree with that, Brian. My only other observation, again, from the US case, as churches are opening up, and listening to the leaders that I'm listening to, and also my friends in Colorado, Utah, and even locally, local Baptist church, and even our church, like there's not a lot of discernible differences. We've gone back to the comfort and we're just streaming services, and we're doing something on Channel 44, which, you know, Caring You Off, good news and bad news. It gives us a chance to say, oh, well, that's where everybody is now. Now, I'm not saying anybody's doing that, right? But that's how the broadcast can be used. It can, I'm regularly hearing from the US that 25% of people where people are well vaccinated and things aren't open, or even Dave Adamson was talking about far north Queensland. About 20% of people haven't come back in far north Queensland. Well, if you get a broadcast, it's easy just to say, oh, well, yeah, they're all at home on the broadcast. But, you know, are they? Are they really? And are they cooking dinner while they listen to the broadcast?
Yeah, the new norm is something we're still trying to find out what it is.
Indeed. But like some of those guys that I gave you, the guy talking about working with the Indian and looking to the East for how to use church networks, etc. Yes, that's a humble thing. Let's look to what's already working in other parts of the world. And are there things that we can learn about relationships? Because after all, we're in a culture where independence is a virtue, and we're autonomous. And he's now looking at cultures where
what's going in other parts of the world. We can see other parts of the world to learn from. Whereas in times past, we're all cut off from each other.
Exactly. But not only, they're in more community-oriented cultures. I think of the people I know in East Timor. Please spare a thought for the people in East Timor, because what probably most Australians don't know is a terrible cyclone that went through them, and that they've been wiped out. Only lost about 100 people, but absolutely everything else has been wiped out. Almost everything else. Anyway, I digress.
Just a comment I made. One of the challenges now is not to convince others of the truth, but to be heard, because there's just such a barrier of bias and prejudice that people are just not interested in listening. And so I don't know how to get around that. Any comments?
Relationship.
Yeah.
Relationship.
Yeah.
I have come to prize my secular and militantly atheist friends and my church community equally. And yes, you know, when I'm talking with actually, it's funny, I have a couple of workmates who are Christians and Christian friends. I get to use both my tech side of my brain, which I don't get to use with my family, and most of my friends, and I get to use the faith side of my brains, which I don't normally get to use with my other workmates. It's sort of a treat, but normally I'm sort of having, and a lot of us have to balance those worlds, right? But once online, once you start fostering relationships across and in our families, and we start acting and being intentional to foster those relationships, particularly with those coming behind us. And Rick Warren, go and listen to the 2 podcasts on Church Pulse Weekly with Rick Warren. He talks about how open people are when they're actually in pain, and everybody's going to be going into pain at some stage in their life. You know what? I can think of a friend of mine who I've only met once or twice. His son of close friends who are in California. He's further north. He's been having a terrible time, and he and I have become really quite close friends. And we've actually been able to encourage each other, and we haven't seen each other for decades. And it's because he's one of the most militant atheists I know. A little less so now, but he and I actually have a great relationship where he can hear some of the things that I say now. It's quite interesting. Relationship, and we know that. We know that. I'm not saying anything here anybody else doesn't know. I'm just saying let's apply it intentionally to the digital world.
A comment from Eric. I know a lot of churches that continue to have services on video, a significant part of what they do. Like David Adamson, my parents' church now has an online campus pastor. Did you want to say anything about this, Eric?
Yeah, so my parents are Ross Trevor Baptists, a ordinary large church, and a few years ago they adopted a existing small church, and so they're kind of a network of 2 locations. Then last year they got services on video like lots of churches did, but now they are sort of making the online thing their 3rd location, with one pastor as he's the pastor of the online congregation. So I don't know too much more about what his approach will be, but that's interesting that they're doing that.
That's wonderful. Could you put me in touch with him, please, Eric? Maybe
I don't know who that pastor is, but that's Ross Trevor Baptist, so you can look them up.
Could you get a contact or ask you?
I can do. Yep.
And I'd love to shout him and maybe you a coffee and hear more about what they're doing. That's exciting to me.
Yep, I'll look that up.
Thank you, sir. You got my contact, don't you, Eric?
On Facebook, I have. Yep.
Yeah, there we go. That'll do.
We're not all that professional in our conduct of our meetings, but we've just kind of passed 250,000 views on YouTube. And well, no, as everybody's done it, and we still get between around about 150 and 200 views a day. So at the moment, we've got 10 people participating in the meeting, and that happens once a fortnight. But it just kind of shows the potential if you actually publish in the world that it can go very wide very quickly.
Can I go back to that for a second then, Kevin, when we get to the end of the questions?
Yeah.
Are we at the end of the questions? Sorry.
We are at the end of the questions. Yeah.
So this is what I started challenging with you or asking you about the other day, and I'm totally under your guidance, but I want to challenge you a little bit. And if I do a 5-minute summary of tonight's presentation,
yes,
will you post that as well?
Well, you can. Yes, yeah, absolutely, yes.
Okay, thanks. We'll see. But let me just share, when I move my mouse correctly, let me share the screen. The Zoom button always moves. Share screen. I have this problem at work as well. Oh, go on, now it's over there.
You're supposed to be an expert in this.
I am. But we still have, Tom, you're on mute. Like, if you can solve that problem. Where is, give me a sec. By the way, no Windows products we used. No Microsoft products went into the creation of this talk tonight, despite somebody giving me pressure to do so. Back to reasonable faith essay. Hang on.
Yes. Apply next time as well.
Sorry, Brian?
So the same will apply next time as well. I use LibreOffice on Linux.
Oh yeah, I'm using LibreOffice. Yeah. Reasonable faith essay. Hang on. Here we go. You can see that, right? I don't need to make that full screen.
No.
Am I sharing?
Yeah, you're fine.
Yeah. So Dave Adamson talks about how you hijack the algorithms, and that's about how you title your talks. So you use the Google algorithm, the search algorithm, you go and see what everybody's searching for. Hey, COVID in the church. And then you retitle your videos, or you title or retitle them with the title that basically means that they're going to turn up in the search engines. I've started looking at that a little bit, and he's right. It can be a good way to go. That's why I called it culture, COVID, technology COVID in the church. And are you guys aware of transcripts?
No, how do you spell that?
I showed you the other day, Kevin. That one. Forget my email. Go to, you can see this, right? I'm sharing my screen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So go to YouTube, and there's got to be some way we can actually use this.
Move the screen across.
Right. But you go to here, and a huge number of videos have them, right? And you open the transcript. Well, now you can actually search the transcript. So you can look for, and then when you click on it, it'll take you to that point in the video.
If you move your screen to the left, then we'll be seen. It's getting blocked by the gallery view at the moment.
So,
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is this button here, right? Open transcript, and that's what happens.
Mm.
Can you see that?
Yeah.
Church splits that have unfortunately marred the path.
See, so, and then what you can actually do is you can actually cut and paste that whole thing, which I did into a tool, and then that's how I got, in fact, if we go to, I'll show you really quick, reasonable faith, and then we go down to, you know how videos, you know how I pulled out that quote from Matt Gray's presentation last year. Yeah. By the way, I did need to credit yours and Gordon's presentation as well, Kevin, but I culled that slide too. So I didn't overlook it. Where is it?
2019, wasn't it? End of 2019?
It was end of 2019. I'm not probably sorted correctly.
It's gone up in January 20.
8 added newest. There we go. That'll help. And here's just 2000 and come on, 11 months, 1 year. Come on, where's Matt? Anyway, all right, that's going to this transcript is how I actually got that's how I actually got the quote and the image from Matt. Actually, I could always just do it this way. Oh, no, I don't want to do that one. Anyway, I'll stop that for the moment. But you get the idea. Have a play with that transcripts tool, because I think it's something we might be able to take advantage of. You can point people to particular, do blog posts and things like that, and point them to particular parts of a video, right? But what about reasonable faith? Retitle the videos, transcripts. We should put the invitations out on Instagram and maybe TikTok. And can we make cut down versions of the most popular presentations so that we can engage younger people and online events? But I think we could actually use the content you've got as well as future content, and we could really increase the amount people actually engage with it and maybe engage with us. And actually, here's an idea, Kevin. I talked about the Ugandan pastor. I think Uganda's time zone would work out quite nicely for there to join us. I mean, why would we ask the question of whether they'd be interested in joining us?
All right, I should follow some of these things up with you. Probably after the meeting.
Yeah, then I'll stop sharing. But they were just some thoughts.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to apply. And by the way, volunteering to help with some of the things that I was trying to. I'm quite happy to put my money where my mouth is.
Right. Okay. I'll be glad to get your money.
Well, that was
metaphorical money. Monopoly money.
Actually, if I get to retire, I'll have more money. I'll have more time to be able to help. But that might be another little while off. I'm not sure. We'll see.
Well, yeah. Tom's, I suppose, showing us that evangelism and discipleship in the digital world is a big deal and one the church needs to work really hard at. And I think a lot of people are, and I think it's a lot of it is being done by people younger than us, and probably that we're not aware of. But I suppose there's also plenty of not so good Christian ministry being done online. There's at least in an ordinary church, usually only someone who knows what they're doing gets to be the preacher, but any old Christian can put something up on Facebook when they don't have a clue, and it makes any number of mistakes, both in fact and in how they're doing it. And yeah, I cringe at what my Christian friends put up or comment on Facebook, and I think, oh, is there an appropriate way to tell him that that's not a good way of doing it? Or
sometimes you just got to tell them.
All right, at this stage, I'll complete the recording, but thank you very much.
Oh, that was still recording?
Yes, it's still recording.
Oh, goody. I thought you stopped the recording.
No. You stopped your talk, but we recorded the discussion, so this is being recorded now. But yeah, anyway, you're flummoxed now, are you?
An hour of me talking is going to be even less attractive than, sorry guys, than 2 hours of us talking.
Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, thank you very much. I formally thank you for your presentation, for this discussion. It's stimulated, and so I'll stop the recording now.